Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
We are here with a rare treat for this episode of the Connected Campus podcast, bringing in somebody working in the trenches of Australian higher education. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot. I've not really talked about this in depth with a lot of people, even though, we kind of skirt around Australian higher education. Our roots go back there. So I feel like this is my deep dive to kind of get my stripes here. So we will start out as we always do with our guest, Rosie. If you want to introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your professional background, then we'll dig in with what you're working on currently, and then kind of Australian higher ed at large.
Thank you so much for having me today, Dustin. I'm incredibly excited to be here. My name is Rosie Brown. I'm from New Zealand and moved to Australia about 9 years ago. And I actually started my career in banking before moving into higher education. And what I have found has been kind of the theme of my career so far has been high value decision-making purchases or experiences for different clients. And when I started, my professional career, I didn't ever expect that I was going to be in university and education marketing for, the first 10 years. But it's taken me to some really interesting places, and I've worked with some really brilliant people. So the key areas that I would say have been the parts of it, my roles that I've really loved and enjoyed, has been focusing on user experience, customer decision making, a lot of content strategies. That's definitely where I still like to get my hands into kind of the deep work, and personalization around different experiences. So whether that's financial decisions, education, property, not-for-profit work, that's kind of the sectors that I've touched on a lot. But with university marketing, one of the key things I always come back to is how can we improve the student experience and make what is often one of the biggest decisions that a person makes in their life outside of possibly buying their first home. How do we make that experience better for them and more personalized to what they're up to? So that's kind of what I've been doing. Started in customer service, then moved into overseas student programs and then overseas student recruitment before coming to Student Garden about 5 years ago to head up the education arm of their business. So I don't know if you want to me to keep running in terms of what Student Garden and Social Garden do.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of the things you said are kind of values that we share here at Pathify. So I think just like folks in kind of the education space that really care about kind of user experience and all that. And I think so much of, and I guess it's, interesting to hear that, this is the case kind of in your neck of the woods as well. That's the idea of education maybe being like later adopters and things that you were seeing elsewhere. And then you can kind of like ride that wave as it kind of hits higher education. Because I think, it traditionally was not designed necessarily to be this like super accessible, easy to navigate and all that. It was kind of, not built with that in mind. So I think, there's much work to be done in those areas. And I think certainly there's no shortage of opportunities with, the advent of all these kind of digital tools and everything to kind of really manifest that and kind of realize that aspiration. And I think a lot of institutions have now of, being as accessible as possible and really just having, really positive user experiences and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, I know that's what you've kind of immersed yourself in now, the work that you are doing, Student Garden, which is part of Social Garden, education focused kind of segment of that organization. So if you want to kind of outline, the whole team, how that kind of works there, your team specifically with Student Garden and the work that you do in the higher education space there.
Absolutely. So Social Garden's been around for about 10 years and was founded by three Kiwis who are now obviously all based in Melbourne. So we have offices in Melbourne, Sydney, Philippines and New Zealand. Always a treat when I get to fly back to New Zealand to do any work. And they decided on education and property, again, to kind of the point around what I've been up to, because it's often one of the biggest decisions of someone's life. And then as a result of that, the sale is not an overnight decision. Therefore, there's a lot of kind of touch points and marketing activity that is connected to that process. And often what we find in Australia and New Zealand, and probably where a lot of our listeners are too around the world, is when the economy is down, people often return to study. And when the economy is up, people invest more in buying properties. So what we see is like this really interesting balance between our two business units across education and property, where when the property market gets cold, the education team really ramps up the work that we're doing. So I've always thought that was a very smart play by the gents to kind of decide and land on those two industries. From a business decision, it makes a lot of sense as well. So Social Garden is our parent company. We took the Student Garden brand into its own unit about 3 years ago. And that really allowed us to double down on the education market, because we used to kind of be Social Garden doing education and property. And from a B2B marketing space, that was quite challenging to keep consistent. So Student Garden has its own brand. We have our own strategist and customer service team, but then the kind of broader business still services across the unit. We're also in the process of acquiring a few other businesses on the property side and looking to see what we can do in the edtech space over the next few years, which is really exciting. We work with universities, private education providers, and TAFEs, which are for the US market. TAFE offers kind of certificates and diplomas as kind of an entry level or more practical kind of education experience. So we service the market. We also work with a few schools and a few education technology companies. And we really focus on brand awareness through to enrollment. I would say 90% of the work we do is kind of in that space. And then we do a little bit with current students and alumni. But really what we're helping education providers do is increase the number of people that know about your institution and then kind of nurture them through the process of actually applying and enrolling in study. And those services span across brand awareness, content development, digital advertising, marketing automation. We have a call center based in Melbourne that we help to kind of convert students across the line. And then more and more, we've been doing work in kind of AI and automation and technical support there. So quite diverse. Every day is different, but really the number one goal is helping education providers to acquire students. And we like to always kind of focus a bit of an ROI lens on it, like how much is it costing you to acquire each student and what's the effort involved there.
Yeah, and I like what you said. For me, just a good sort of reminder of like how unique higher ed marketing is. Like you said, it's typically going to be a longer nurturing of that person as they're making this big decision. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of engage with them. And it often is something that people kind of, I think, will specialize in a little bit more and can kind of be something that's kind of just its own world. And certainly there's even just certain things you could do that are like out of bounds, that like you gotta have to be mindful of. But it's just a unique, complex, long sort of journey versus sometimes if it's just like, yeah, we're trying to have you impulsively buy something, at a store. It's like, yeah, it's just the wrapper of the thing that look, appealing, I guess. And it's just impulse and you're done. And that's the whole sort of thing. But so I think that's like the idea of like, there's a lot of routes that you can guide someone along in terms of just building awareness. And I've come to appreciate so much more where it kind of was like, I think, for me several years ago, kind of eye rolling, seeing just this advent of higher ed marketing, because it's just like, oh, it's kind of just like a weird paradigm shift. But it's like knowing now that there's so many institutions and amazing institutions that people just don't know about. And that idea that is like, yeah, we can kind of equalize the playing field and make sure that people are making more informed choices versus just like the few household names or the one place that's near where they live. And it's just kind of like a foregone conclusion, then it's just like, well, I just go there, right? That's what you're supposed to do. It's like, well, actually, for what you want to study and the way that you want to do it or whatever, and they would love to have somebody like you. You could actually also get like an amazing scholarship or something, and how do we help just like uplift all of these kind of different institutions and what they have to offer and all of that. So that's kind of like, I feel like I've kind of come full circle of just like, yeah, how can we help elevate more, of these institutions that can really, offer more to more students versus everyone kind of like dogpiling onto like one place. And, some of these places, speaking as from like, American higher education with like the Ivy League, it's like, okay, well, their admit rate is going to be super low. Everybody's trying to get it. Like it, that dynamic does not suit many people. And there's a lot of factors that are going to put, sort of headwinds in people's way. So, how can we, uplift those other institutions out there? But, I guess as sort of a, my education here about Australian higher education, we're recording this February 2024, just in the spirit of like a new year. And still, I feel like in kind of the gray spirit of like looking back to the year that was, or, what are some of the big headlines that you saw in Australian or just maybe writ large kind of the world that you work in, New Zealand and, Southeast Asia and everything? Like, what are some of the big headlines you saw from your point of view this past year?
Yeah, this was a fun one to reflect on when you sent like this question back to me a few weeks ago. Over the last year, I have interviewed about 15 education leaders, so CMOs, international directors, general managers of different education providers. And we've also spoken at about half a dozen conferences across Australia, and as a result attended about half a dozen conferences across Australia. And there's been quite a few different things that I've picked up across the last year. The obvious one is AI, but specifically what I'm just starting to see is universities advertising for AI-focused roles. So Victoria University, which is one of the unis based here in Melbourne, have like just put out a AI and automation specific role that's helping the university to understand how to approach that technology and use it within their business processes. So I thought that was really interesting that that's kind of starting now to come into the university's actual staffing base, because unis can be slower moving, not necessarily because of the people that are in them, but just because of the structure, the size, and the bureaucracy of an institution. So I thought it was quite impressive to see that there already. Last year, I was speaking to an incredible woman named Ainsley Moore, who was the international director at one of the universities in Auckland. And she was saying how they're in the process of trying to build an AI tool that allows them to assess which international offers to assess first. Like, is it your top 10% of students that are going to convert, or should it be your middle 20 to 40% of students that are probably considering you versus someone else? So speed to response is really important. So the fact that different organizations are really approaching AI in that way already was really cool to me. And I feel like we've been running at it, full steam ahead, but we're also a digital agency who relies on kind of being thought leaders in that space. So that for me has been awesome to see. The other one that I have been just so relieved to kind of see moving, when I worked at Deakin University 6 years ago now, we were creating work integrated learning programs that allowed students to do marketing or management 2-week programs overseas. And at the time, that was, incredibly innovative. These days, it's very much part of the curriculum. And if you don't offer internships and global programs, students won't even consider you. But what I'm seeing now is experiential innovation, entrepreneurship programs, what students are really looking for as part of their education. So yes, they want to know the fundamentals of marketing or economics, but they also want to apply that. And Sometimes I see curriculum not keeping up with the pace of the job market and the requirements of the job market. So to see non-university organizations creating programs that are offering students the experiences that they require in order to be a global citizen and incredibly well-employed student has been really cool. So there's a company called Hex, which have just partnered with UCID to deliver the first 5 units of a bachelor's degree completely matched to the University of Sydney's curriculum. So students can get entrepreneurial innovation experience as part of a bachelor's degree, as opposed to just doing that before or after they finish their course. So that to me has been really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a through line, I think, because like I was observing it, I think a lot, the sort of like, I think, in the US, it's sort of like, workforce development, because it's depending on like what angle you're taking it, where it's like, okay, if somebody maybe has been working for a while, they need to reskill. And, there's people sort of, I guess it's all kind of blurry because it just depends on sort of the context you're talking about it. But like at the core of it, often is that like applied learning sort of philosophy. It's like, okay, you can work to learn, then learn to work, and then like kind of go in this sort of continuous cycle in terms of how the order of things, and then how is there sort of synergy, how are things sort of in the synchronous kind of flow for students that are pursuing jobs, because like could help them to determine better what they would be well suited to do or excited to do, or it's just more efficient, or it's like you could just kind of laundry list of like, here's all the reasons why this is really amazing. Like it just solidifies learning so much more, makes it very tangible and relevant, and all these sort of things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea that we've at least, and I think in different parts of the world is at different stages of the journey. But I know like for the US, like I think we're reaching this sort of like critical mass of awareness, and hoping that that's sort of the tipping point to kind of normalize like apprenticeships and everything, just like have them just be more common, and a better, more structured, and kind of seamless kind of pathway and on-ramp that folks in sort of their post-secondary journey can go through. But good to know that, in your neck of the woods, that is definitely top of mind, or sort of very, very noticeable trend to you as well. And I think the AI one is interesting, that I think, as much as higher ed, has had this like existential crisis about it, that idea that you're starting to see people acknowledge like, okay, well, let's start integrating it maybe into the curriculum. We'll have some courses or minors, or, we'll have parts of the administration that are, evaluating it, or sort of starting to put some kind of checks and balances and things on it. The idea that it's like not just sort of stick your head in the sand and ignore it. It's like, how can we integrate it in a thoughtful way? Because I think that's the moment after this last year of sort of like the sky is falling, that like was happening in society and all their hot takes. It's like, okay, let's start to have a measured approach to this, and that is certainly very refreshing to see. The sort of shapes and forms and everything. But we could certainly keep with the AI through line with this question. But like, I try to just ask this to everybody and keep it very open-ended to just see kind of, how things are kind of shaking out. But how have you seen digital transformation specifically like affecting higher ed institutions, in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere? Like the challenges, the opportunities, because I think, whether it's like digital education, online courses, or, just the way that institutions are, modernizing maybe their tech stacks, or, and their whole kind of ecosystems, any anecdotes, any sort of, reflections or sort of points of view that you have on that?
When it comes to digital transformation, there's a few kind of key things. The first one is we're still really struggling with the data connection piece. So a lot of the systems that universities and TAFEs and RTOs are using aren't speaking to each other as easily as they should, which I'm sure as a Pathfire sales consultant, you're like, fantastic to hear. But we're working with a lot of clients more focused on their application and enrollment piece than historically we were doing more in the lead acquisition and nurture piece and getting them to apply. Whereas I feel like most organizations have got that pretty down now. And now it's more focused on, okay, well, how can we improve the conversion of people who are submitting an application to then actually accepting their offer to then enrolling in their courses. So there's been a lot more happening there. But the data piece is the thing that's really getting in the way. As a result of that, a lot of organizations are hiring internally data specialists that can kind of work with their systems and then using agencies to kind of fill some of those gaps. So that to me has been a big one. We're working with a university in Western Australia called Curtin, and we've done some really awesome work with them on mapping out all of the communications that happen through the application enrollment period across 6 different platforms. One of those platforms being the manual sends that the future students team do. But it's crazy that there's so many different touch points across so many different systems and tech. So I think that's still a challenge, but it's become a bigger focus and organizations are investing more in it finally. So I think that's going to allow a lot more personalization than what we've seen previously. The other thing is that the decision-making trigger points are changing. We used to kind of laugh that no one should ever be surprised. No one in a marketing or sales team should ever be surprised by what's going to happen next year, because you have your open day and then you have your change of preference and then you have your enrollment period and it comes through every year. But Dean Gould and I, who's Dean's the CMO of Southern Cross, were chatting at the end of last year about how he's been really surprised by the changes and the fluctuations in when students are making decisions. And it used to be, 12 to 18 months, whereas these days, people might be deciding that they want to study within a 3 to 6 month period. And how that kind of connects back to digital transformation is that organizations can no longer have a standard nurture journey where we go, okay, well, we'll send something in 2 weeks and then 4 weeks later we'll send this comm and then we might send them an SMS. The automation and the conversion approach needs to be personalized to each student. And so the strategies that are involved, the channels and the technologies that people are using is having to change in order to accommodate for the fact that students want a response within a couple of hours and they want to be able to enroll with the click of a button rather than having to manually upload a ton of forms. And if they visit your website 4 times, you probably want to alert someone to call them rather than just expecting that they're going to get an email in 3 weeks' time. So a lot more of that kind of trigger-based communications has been what I've seen. But in order to do that, the data needs to be clean. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg for some organizations at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's I would definitely agree of how digital transformation is kind of forcing that point for a lot of institutions that it's like, yeah, there might be a lot just sort of like floating in the ether and you kind of have to tie it all together. And especially like you said, in that moment where an application has come through, it's like, you've got this gold mine because it's like, okay, I've told you my name and my, all my personal information, what I want to study and like, all these sort of things versus like that idea that like, investing at the like tippity top of the funnel where it's like so ambiguous and you're trying to just like capture attention and all that. It's like, okay, cool. We've could maybe put that aside to an extent, for now. And we really, really need to start to harness the complexity of this sort of like, murky middle to an extent of like this person has shown an interest, they've put in an application, how do we get them to commit, like how do we kind of really seal the deal here? And I think that takes, and I guess like a different kind of work. It takes that more sort of internal data cleanliness and data structuring and just sort of tying everything together. And I guess it's even to honor what you said too, like it's not made any easier. Like it's made even more complex where there's just like, people coming in from all different angles versus that like one tried and true, just sort of like pathway that everybody has to take because it's really the only way. It could be like, any number of various routes and everything. So, it's definitely like it's a big undertaking. And I think it's even the idea that like, there's a variety of tools out there, a variety of ways to do it and all that of like, your preference or your culture as an institution of just how you want to try to, have those nudges, have those reminders, have those triggers. How are you going to, staff up? Is it going to be people calling? Is it going to be, uh, emails or texts or this or that? It's like you just kind of have to like just do that work and figure out that strategy and leverage good partners and good different perspectives and look to your peers and see what they're doing. So I think that's part of it nowadays, is that there's no shortage of opportunities and tools and things, and it often ends up being where you as institutional leaders probably going to remix and mash up, what's going on out there. You're going to be like, oh, cool. Well, we have that, but we have this other thing that we really like. So maybe we can actually, connect these things together, do something different that kind of works better for us. Cause it could be that like, well, we're at a scale where it doesn't make sense, or, we couldn't really fathom giving personal calls to every single person that visits our website several times. And other places, it's like, hey, we're small. We like being small. We love having that personal touch. Yeah, we're absolutely going to go down that path to really try to, have a very warm kind of intake for students and everything. So, lots to think about. And I think something else that I regret not bringing it up, because I think it's one of those interesting things of like, we've talked so much about kind of, Australia, New Zealand, and, Philippines, like neighboring parts of your region, but there are two kind of large Goliaths nearby of like, China, which I feel like is its own can of worms, which, that's a episode for another time. India, I think, is one that I hear a lot about even here in terms of just sort of like, funding rounds or acquisitions and all those sort of things. So I'm curious if you have any sort of perspective on, how that sort of like influences, like they're just a big neighbor, but I think sometimes just ends up kind of being lumped to where it's like, well, it's just India, as if it's just this like isolated island that doesn't even, doesn't impact anything else or isn't impacted by anything else, whatever way you want to take it. So, I guess your perspectives on that, because again, it's just this sort of rare opportunity where I feel like you're sort of closer to it, literally and figuratively, than we are here. So any thoughts on how sort of Indian higher ed or Indian ed tech is sort of interplaying with your day-to-day?
Last year in Australia, I think we had about 770,000 international students in Oz as a whole. The largest market is China. I think it was about 170,000, but the second largest is India. So we had 124,000 students from India, which is 16% of the international student population. And I don't know if it's the same in the US, but time in country is one of the kind of biggest indicators of which universities have kind of the market share over that country. And Deakin University, which is a Victorian-based uni, has been in India for a very long time with a very well-established team to recruit students in, or kind of put people through pathways to send them into Australia. But last year, at the end of last year, they have announced that they're creating a campus based in India to service local students in India, as opposed to students necessarily having to come to Australia, but they still get an Australian qualification. And it's the first university to do that in India, outside of the first global university to do that in India. There are other Australian universities that do that in other countries. So, for example, RMIT is in Vietnam. But to place a university in one of Australia's largest markets is going to be really interesting to see how that then kind of translates to the volume of students that will come to Australia. Will doing that then increase the overall amount of people who are then traveling? Because word of mouth is so important for a lot of Southeast Asian students' decision-making process. So there's other unis now following suit that are also setting up campuses in India, and it's a bit of a race to like, how quickly can we get this up? My partner also works for Deakin, is currently recruiting staff to kind of help with that process. So it's been kind of interesting to be on the periphery of that. But I think more and more we're seeing organizations going to the student as opposed to expecting the students to come to us. But it's such a large part of the Australian economy, international students, and the money that they bring into this country. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see kind of what that looks like and how that impacts Australia's reputation across Asia, and then also kind of how that impacts the economy across Australia.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's kind of funny because like the US, like, always sort of like flirting with like international students, but it's like for several years for political and also like global pandemic reasons, like I think has really like started to kind of recede from, that sort of just like marketplace of really heavily recruiting international students. And I presumed it was far more prevalent than it was, but even like the idea of sort of exporting students for like study abroad or whatever, like, that doesn't really happen that much in the US. Like, so I think it's just kind of, on that sort of level, just created more space or opportunity for others. But even just that idea of kind of the regional players, it's just going to be, I don't know, it's more influential in the sense of like you said, like word of mouth being so powerful. The idea that like, okay, yeah, like we'll kind of put our flag here and kind of establish a campus here because it's sort of like I feel like certain institutions in the US have like tried to do that in different parts of the world, but I feel like I've just never gotten a clear picture of like, are you doing it for recruitment or are you just trying to like buy some buildings so study abroad is easier? Maybe like in some places like they open it and then they close it. Like, so it's just so like mercurial for the US, but just the idea, of an Australian university making that kind of commitment really does send a clear signal, like you said, that like that international market is very fruitful, very important to them, and is going to shape how Australian higher ed sort of matures in the years to come. And I mean, I think it's only a good thing. I do think like the earnest desire of having the sort of international students, and what they could add to like, wherever you are, the domestic students, that sort of experience and everything is good. But then just, if it is the idea that, that institution is recognizing an opportunity to try to just bring more access, literally right to kind of the doorstep of more people. It's like, hey, the world benefits from being more educated. Like we're all going to benefit from that. So that's just that's great to hear, and certainly a trend line that we'll want to follow in the years to come. So as we start to wind down, curious advice that you would give to other higher ed leaders now. It sounds like, like a lot of similar things happening in your neck of the woods as to ours. So just advice that you would give to higher ed leaders right now. We're entering into a new calendar year, so I feel like it's a good time for it.
I think getting really, really clear on your reporting and investing in ensuring that you have clarity around that. I was actually in a meeting yesterday talking to a university who still didn't kind of have reporting around the impact of who still didn't have reporting around the output that their content team delivers each year. And, they're still approaching, okay, well, we're producing 500 assets a year, but they didn't have the visibility on kind of and exactly what is that translating to from like an engagement rate point of view and a views point of view and a driving to the website point of view. And I thought it was just interesting that would really be limiting in kind of the decision-making process that as a leader you would want to make around your investment. And I think if you have clarity over your content team, your sales team, your automation team, your advertising team, your other teams outside of marketing that I'm not focusing on, and having, very, very clear understanding of what each function is delivering, I think that would allow a lot smarter decision making in terms of where to go from here, especially with everything we've touched on with the requirements of the student and what they're looking for. The other thing that I thought about was really understanding what you're hiring for your internal functions versus your external agencies and functions. I think sometimes there's a real crossover in terms of what we deliver for our clients and also some of the people that do it internally. And where I see it work the best is where we have partners who are saying like, no, you are delivering this and we want your advice, your strategic mind, your technical support for this part because we don't have that internally. And then we're going to focus on this part of it. And having that really clear definition between the roles and the functions makes, as a partner, it makes it a lot more engaging for us, because the trust is there, the support's there, and the reliance that, you're here to deliver this work. But also it gives internal kind of teams more clarity around the kind of hiring process and where the gaps are. And I've seen that work really well with a few of our partners. So I think I'll kind of leave it with those two today. I've got many, many, many things if anybody wants to hit me up. But those are kind of the two things that I've experienced a lot of in the last year.
Yeah, those are good. I mean, actionable pieces of advice. I get, and that idea of, like you said, higher institutions, they're large, complex organizations. They're like cruise ships, trying to navigate and move around. So the idea of being really thoughtful and intentional and clear with how you're leveraging external tools and agencies and all those sort of things, because it could be well, this is a really, impactful area for this, for us, we can maybe amplify that even further, or this is an area that we've always wanted to, get into, we just can't, so we need to bring in some help for that or something. Just be, thoughtful, so there's not redundancies or, just inefficiencies or something. But even that idea of what you said of be really clear on kind of the content you're making or anything else you're doing, what's the impact of it, and all that. Because I think it is idea of the culture of higher ed, just unfortunately and tragically often is that idea of kind of just being too based in maybe anecdotes or kind of just going off the cuff, or just oh, I guess we'll figure it out and all that. But I don't know how it's shaking out in Australia and everywhere else there, but that America really is going through this reckoning, where a lot of these institutions that kind of were skirting around with that sort of philosophy of oh, it'll all work out in the end, I guess. And it's just I mean, you kind of have to make it work out. It's not just going to have some natural law that you will just continue existing because you've always existed and whatever. So the idea of being good kind of stewards of the resources that you have, trying to focus in the right places and use the right supports and tools and those sort of, that's the idea, where it's just oh, wow, we ended up working with this agency for, some span of time, and I don't think we got as much out of them as we could have, or the right things out of them, or we're creating 500 pieces of content, but it's I mean, were they effective? I don't know. Maybe. I felt like they were. I liked them. I thought they were cool. But it's the idea of well, actually, this one was more popular, and it's more popular at this time of year. And these, mediums, they've really gained traction on social, and, prospects seem to really like them versus current students. But in the idea that you could break that down and understand that okay, so we should do more of this, less of that, share more here, or share more of this kind of content here versus, and that that efficiency and effectiveness, I think, allows you to get into a place where you're hopefully able to just maybe be a lean, mean team and have, use the resources that you have and, the most effective way possible. So yeah, I think those are just the idea of the broad ecosystem that these institutions are having to navigate. It's the idea well, these are all the pieces that help get you to a place of being kind of sustainable, is having that really good reporting and, bringing in the help and using it in the right way at the right time. And, so yeah, great advice. And yeah, I'm glad that you just giving those clear, tangible things that folks can take advantage of.
I'll share with you as well, just one little thing that I'm sure your listeners will be interested in. When we look at the US market and we compare it to the Australian market, one of the things that, I won't say the name of this university, but one of the largest universities in Australia that does compete with a lot of your Ivy League institutions, the way that they are comparing Australia versus the US is a lot of the US institutions are these slow-moving, traditional, bureaucratic institutions that have been around for hundreds of years, and as a result have hundreds of years of reputation, whereas a lot of the Australian universities are 50 to 100 years old. And as a result of that, we have positioned ourselves as more dynamic, more fun, more innovative. So when students are comparing, should I go to the US or should I go to Australia, we're kind of leaning into more playfulness, more of the student experience outside of the classroom. And that's been something that I've seen, if we compare Harvard's marketing strategy, Yale's marketing strategy versus some of them in Australia. Like if you put them side by side, you would really see that coming through, which has been, it's cool to watch. Our engagement is often a lot higher on content as a result.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of to the initial point, that idea that good marketing, good storytelling, and all those sort of things uplifts an option, which most people would say oh, they could, never compete with the Harvards of the world or whatever. It's if you do it right, then you can. And the idea that that's hopefully going to resonate with these people, that they might think that it's just, okay, well, I've got to go, again to the local place or the Ivy League or whatever. It's it's going to actually end up being a better fit for you. And yeah, that's just amazing that you see that comparison, and you see that that differentiation, that contrast, is going to be what's going to help different players sort of become sort of ascendant and survive and thrive and all that. So that's a good example. Our final question we always end with: what does a connected campus look and or feel like to you?
I think it's a space where the digital experience matches the quality of an on-campus experience, and allowing students to engage with their learning in a way that works for them. And whether that's through experiential learning processes where 50% of their degree is off overseas or in a workplace, or learning from their peers as opposed to just their lecturers, or whether it's a campus that is genuinely designed for the student and not the staff that work at the campus, which I think a lot of universities do. I think it's about the speed and the communication and the ways that students can engage with us. And at the end of the day, when I really summarize why we do what we do, it's to make education accessible for more people. So that's been really one of the guiding principles of kind of why I've still been doing this, 10 years later. And
yeah, I like that. I guess what I'm hearing is that idea that there's a connectedness, because nowadays, a student could be studying any number of ways, but no matter what, there is sort of I guess just maybe a core, in the sense of the quality, or sort of, whatever the institutional values are and those sort of things. It's whether you're here or anywhere else, fully online, hybrid, and all these other kind of different modalities and ways that people are studying, that you can really have this tie that binds, and that shared because I think that's part of what a shared affinity and kind of a community can really be built around, is how do you bring that kind of that brand through in all those different places and spaces and all that. So good words to end on, a good sentiment. Very much appreciate it, and everything else that you've shared, and appreciate you for all the work that you do, and for taking time out to hang out for the podcast here. Ways to connect with you and Student Garden, and all that in the description for the episode. But just thanks so much for your time.
I've had fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.